At 9:56 a.m., the first alarm sounded in the cockpit. Chaff streaked into the sky as missiles began their silent chase across the empty valley. The Ukrainian MiG-29 was climbing through 1,000 feet toward Ork to neutralize a Russian ammunition depot. For 12 minutes, the flight proceeded under routine conditions, maintaining planned altitude, heading, and speed. Navigation relied on inertial guidance integrated with onboard mission computers to adhere to the ingress route while minimizing exposure to known radar coverage. The radar warning receiver continuously scanned for emissions indicative of hostile surface-to-air systems, but no alerts occurred until this moment. An S-400 battery near Miltopo acquired the MiG at 120 kilometers. The system's multi-function engagement radar began tracking the aircraft, calculating a firing solution for a 48 N6 missile. Once the lock was achieved, the MiG's radar warning receiver emitted a continuous tone, confirming a high-priority SAM threat. The S-400 fire control system initiated the missile launch sequence. The 48 N6 missile, a long-range surface-to-air weapon with inertial and radar guidance, accelerated past Mach 2 within the first second. Propellant burn was optimized for rapid climb and terminal speed, with trajectory calculations accounting for altitude, target velocity, and expected evasive maneuvers. At 120 kilometers, the impact was estimated at approximately 80 seconds, potentially extending to 90 seconds if evasive action succeeded. The pilot responded immediately. He applied a hard right input on the control stick while deploying chaff. The MiG maneuvered into a 90-degree aspect relative to the radar beam, a standard notching tactic to reduce radar return intensity. The pilot maintained the perpendicular heading for 8 seconds, releasing chaff in pre-programmed intervals. Aluminum strips formed a dispersing cloud carried by ambient wind, producing thousands of radar reflective points. The S-400's algorithms attempted to distinguish targets from clutter using elevation, azimuth, and Doppler velocity returns. The perpendicular aspect minimized the Doppler shift, making the MiG appear a stationary terrain. Track quality degraded from solid to intermittent to lost. The 48 N6 missile, deprived of guidance updates due to loss of lock, defaulted to backup inertial trajectory mode. It proceeded toward the last predicted intercept coordinates. The MiG simultaneously executed a diving maneuver to further complicate missile terminal acquisition. The missile's active radar seeker in the terminal phase searched for a target now approximately 2 kilometers away, obscured by chaff. The proximity fuse detected only dispersed aluminum strips. The warhead detonated at the programmed distance, producing shrapnel in empty airspace, achieving no effect on the MiG. The success of the notching maneuver relied on Doppler radar principles. Doppler processing measures frequency shifts in radar returns to differentiate moving objects from stationary ones. By presenting a flight path perpendicular to the radar, the MiG effectively reduced relative radial velocity to 0. The radar algorithms identified the aircraft as non-moving terrain, and the missile's guidance system lost track. After evading the missile, the MiG leveled at 500 feet. The pilot assessed tactical conditions, confirming missile smoke trails and reviewing instrument readings for fuel and hydraulic system status. Additional threats remained. The Russian Gravestone phased array radar consists of thousands of transmitter-receiver modules capable of rapid electronic beam steering. The system retains target data, including position, heading, and velocity, calculating probable intercept points for continued engagement. Approximately 30 seconds were available before reacquisition. Gravestone operators switched to bistatic mode, splitting the radar between 2 sites, the transmitter at Miltopo and a receiver 40 kilometers away at a different azimuth. This configuration allowed detection of returns below the primary radar horizon. Weak and intermittent reflections from the MiG reached the distant receiver, permitting reacquisition without line of sight to the main transmitter. The radar's electronic processing adjusted beam orientation and pulse repetition frequencies to maximize detection probability. Algorithms cross-referenced terrain elevation, environmental clutter, and Doppler velocity components to identify anomalous returns consistent with aircraft flight. The MiG's radar warning receiver detected the transmitted signal but could not detect the distant receiver's acquisition, leaving the aircraft vulnerable to renewed engagement. Tactical considerations included altitude, heading, and maneuvering options constrained by terrain and remaining radar coverage. Vertical maneuvers were limited to avoid entering additional threat envelopes. The pilot prepared for further defensive measures, including high G climbs, chaff deployment, and course adjustments while monitoring fuel and structural limits. At 10:03 a.m., the Buck M3 system received precise targeting data. The MiG was expected to transit a slight rise overlooking the valley within 90 seconds. The S-400 had already supplied the information. Altitude 500 feet, speed 480 knots, heading 067. The Buck's 9's 36M radar went from cold to radiating in 3 seconds, the phased array already pointing at the predicted intercept. This was not random hunting, but a calculated engagement. Terrain masking, fuel consumption, and expected pilot behavior were all factored into the system's solution. The Ukrainian pilot's radar warning receiver exploded with alarms. Buck acquisition was complete. Signal strength maximum, track mode achieved. He had roughly 4 seconds before missile launch. The terrain geometry confined him, ridge lines on both sides, no room to dive without collision, no room to climb without exposing himself to multiple S-400 batteries within 50 kilometers. The pilot faced a box with no favorable options. 2 9M 317M missiles erupted from their tubes, accelerating through the sound barrier before clearing the tree line. Each missile weighed 690 kilograms and pulled 35 Gs in the terminal phase. Forces impossible for the MiG to match through maneuvering alone. The pilot watched them on his missile warning system, estimating intercept in 31 seconds. These missiles used command guidance until the last moment, continuously updated by the ground radar. Breaking the lock would have no effect. The pilot's only chance required extreme energy trade-offs. He pulled the stick toward his stomach, applying full throttle, initiating a maximum performance climb. The MiG accelerated upward, G-meter peaking at 7.5, the aircraft now weighing 7.5 times normal load. The pilot experienced grayout, blood pooling in his legs and abdomen. At 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, and 4,000 feet, he monitored altitude carefully. At 4,500 feet, he released every chaff cartridge while rolling inverted and pulling through, executing a full barrel roll. Aluminum strips formed a radar snowstorm. The first missile attempted to follow but could not match the roll rate, passing 100 meters below. The second missile calculated the predicted trajectory, but the pilot had anticipated it. He altered the maneuver mid-roll, applying negative Gs and bunting toward the ground in an opposite vector. The missile corrected but overshot by 200 meters. The proximity fuse triggered in empty air. The pilot survived, though the maneuver consumed 300 kilograms of fuel in 40 seconds. Reducing airspeed to 180 knots, barely above stall. The Buck crew immediately began reloading, the 9 T-243 transport vehicle positioning a fresh missile via crane. The automated system followed trained procedures, muscle memory, and mechanical precision ensured readiness. The MiG, still in range and slowed from defensive maneuvers, remained vulnerable. The commander observed the reload while tracking the aircraft. The pilot climbed toward release altitude for his GBU-39s, needing 15,000 feet for maximum glide range. The climb required 90 seconds. The Buck reload would complete in 45. 2 missiles fired simultaneously as the pilot reached 14,000 feet, a critical error. Simultaneous launch created a single defensive problem instead of 2 sequential ones. The pilot maintained course for 12 seconds, allowing GPS receivers to acquire satellites and download weather data, essential for initial guidance. At 14 seconds, with incoming missiles traveling at 4 times the speed of sound, he released the GBU-39s. The bombs separated cleanly, wings deploying as he rolled inverted, pulling toward Earth. 7 Gs pressed him down, missiles attempting to follow, but unable to turn 180 degrees in the available distance. Both 9M317M missiles overshot, triggering proximity fuses in empty air. At 8,000 feet, the pilot leveled off, checking fuel. 1,850 kilograms. Extreme maneuvering had exhausted reserves. Flying straight and level could reach Ukrainian airspace if unmolested. The threat receiver now indicated a new signal, Su-35S search radar, bearing 240, range 85 kilometers, closing rapidly. Intercept had been coordinated by the same network guiding the Buck, marking the pilot as prey. The Su-35 achieved a lock at 60 kilometers with an R-77 active radar missile, range of 110 kilometers. The probability of killing at that distance was low. The Russian pilot closed to ensure success. At 55 kilometers, the R-77 launched, accelerating past Mach 4. Its active seeker independently tracked the MiG, while mid-course updates maintained trajectory. Time to impact, 47 seconds. The Ukrainian pilot waited until the last moment. He executed a high-nose climb through 30, 40, 50, and 60 degrees. Airspeed dropped to 180 knots, approaching stall. At 70 degrees nose up, he applied full rudder, rotating the aircraft past vertical, halting forward velocity effectively. The missile's guidance algorithm, designed for standard aircraft profiles, failed. By the time it attempted to correct, the MiG had altered trajectory. It overshot by 300 meters, proximity fuse detonating in empty air. The pilot recovered at 5,000 feet, diving toward the deck. Meanwhile, his GBU-39s continued toward the target. Su-35 remained at an advantage, climbing to 20,000 feet for position, but the MiG pilot, now energy depleted, had survived both radar-guided missiles, preserving the mission. At 10:14 a.m., the MiG-29 was flying at approximately 50 feet above ground level, maintaining a low-altitude profile to minimize radar exposure. Engines were operating at near minimum fuel conditions, with the fuel quantity measured at 90 kilograms. The forward airstrip at Orakife was visible on approach, but at the same time, a ZSU Shilka system engaged from a tree line along the flight path. The system was pre-positioned by integrated air defense protocols, coordinated with the S-400 and Book M3 radar assets to maximize coverage of the likely egress corridor. The ZSU Shilka comprised 4 23mm autocannons, each capable of firing 850 rounds per minute. Its radar-guided fire control had a maximum effective range of 2.5 kilometers against low-altitude targets. At the MiG's speed, approximately 270 knots at low altitude, the aircraft would transit the firing envelope in roughly 2 seconds. The MiG's radar warning receiver detected the incoming fire signals and provided immediate threat classification. To evade the firing solution, the pilot executed an inverted roll maneuver while applying negative G loads. The flight path kept the aircraft within meters above the ground, inverting orientation to reduce profile exposure to radar tracking and optical line-of-sight targeting. The Shilka's radar experienced intermittent target acquisition failures due to ground clutter and the inverted flight profile, resulting in non-optimal firing corrections. Despite the evasive action, 3 projectiles struck the vertical stabilizer, and 2 additional rounds impacted the right wing. Sensors reported immediate structural vibration and aerodynamic feedback changes. Hydraulic pressure sensors indicated a rapid loss, with the system entering manual reversion mode. Control surface deflection required direct mechanical input from the stick with no hydraulic amplification. Flight control response time increased and stick resistance grew, reflecting degraded actuation. Efficiency. The pilot maintained trajectory through the system's engagement zone, monitoring smoke from hydraulic leaks and engine exhaust indicators. Instrumentation continued to display warnings for oil pressure below operational minimums, engine temperatures exceeding nominal redline, and fuel reserves critically low. The remaining distance to friendly airspace was 35 kilometers. The Shilka system communicated engagement data to the Integrated Air Defense Network. Position, velocity, altitude, and estimated heading of the MiG were transmitted to secondary platforms to maintain tracking and enable subsequent engagement. The pilot monitored navigation and targeting displays to maintain course, minimizing altitude deviation and conserving remaining fuel. Flight management required balancing airspeed and altitude to prevent a stall while ensuring clearance above terrain obstacles. Negative G maneuvering at low altitude imposed structural lows, which was continuously monitored via strain gauges. Engine performance data indicated reduced thrust due to low fuel and hydraulic pressure loss, affecting control surface efficiency. Navigation was performed using visual cues aligned with the forward airstrip location, supplemented by inertial navigation system data. The time to target was calculated at approximately 30 seconds, assuming steady-state straight and level flight. Any additional evasive maneuver could increase fuel consumption beyond available reserves. Monitoring systems included airspeed indicators, angle of attack sensors, altimeters, engine RPM gauges, and temperature sensors for both engine core and exhaust. The pilot also observed remaining chaff and flare countermeasure inventory, although no additional deployment was indicated as necessary during this segment of the flight. The MiG's flight path adhered to a low-level ingress route designed to minimize radar cross-section exposure while maintaining maximum achievable speed. Terrain following was maintained using both visual observation and radar altimeter data. Ground speed, indicated airspeed, and true airspeed were continuously calculated to ensure sufficient energy for the final approach to the airstrip. Remaining aircraft systems were prioritized for operational necessity. Primary flight controls remained functional in manual mode, engine throttle and afterburner response were preserved, and remaining fuel management focused on extending range to reach friendly lines. Structural integrity monitoring highlighted areas of the vertical stabilizer and right wing already impacted by the Shilka fire. Communication systems were active, providing updates to command and control regarding position and status, though the pilot maintained focus on flight management due to minimal response time available for procedural communication. Environmental conditions, including wind, temperature, and visibility, were factored into approach calculation to prevent further energy loss or deviation from the intended flight path. The pilot executed the flight segment in strict adherence to operational procedures for low-altitude, high-threat ingress under compromised aircraft conditions. Flight instruments were cross-referenced continuously to compensate for degraded sensors. Remaining thrust was managed to maintain airspeed above stall while descending toward Orakife airstrip at the fastest safe rate. At 10:17 a.m., while the GBU-39s completed their mission, the MiG crossed back into Ukrainian airspace. All warning lights illuminated, engine temperature exceeded the instrument scale into the red zone, hydraulics failed and flight controls barely responded. Fuel levels were critical. Only 30 kilograms remained. The forward airstrip appeared 3 kilometers ahead. There was no time for normal landing procedures. The pilot manually lowered the landing gear using the emergency pneumatic system. 2 clunks were heard as the main landing gear locked. The nose gear failed to deploy initially. The aircraft approached at 180 knots, and the pilot kept the nose elevated to avoid premature contact with the runway. The main wheels struck the pavement first, causing a series of bounces until the nose gear finally dropped and locked just before impact. Engines flamed out as he taxied under the hangar area. Turbines spun down, producing grinding sounds of metal contact. The aircraft rolled to a stop approximately 50 meters from the maintenance hangar. Fluid leaks, smoke, and numerous structural holes attested to the intensity of the mission. The MiG had survived, returning home in a critically damaged but operable state. Throughout the engagement, every maneuver, radar evasion, and weapon deployment had been dictated by careful calculation and split-second responses. From low-level penetration against the S-400 to evasive barrel rolls against command-guided missiles, the pilot balanced energy, altitude, and threat avoidance. The deployment of chaff at precise intervals exploited radar limitations, while inverted maneuvers neutralized both command-guided and active radar missiles. The Su-35 engagement demonstrated the MiG's vulnerability post-maneuver. Depleted fuel, limited airspeed, and minimal altitude prevented meaningful counters. Active radar and infrared-guided weapons converged on the aircraft, yet the pilot leveraged flares, vertical stalls, and extreme flight angles to defeat each threat. The integrated Russian air defense network, coordinating S-400, Buk M3, Su-35, and ZSU Shilka systems, represented a layered approach combining radar guidance, infrared homing, and kinetic interception. The MiG's final descent to Orakife highlighted the interplay between weapon accuracy and pilot response under maximum stress. The GBU-39s required precise pre-programmed guidance, with final adjustments by an onboard seeker. The pilot maintained trajectory for weapon release while conserving remaining fuel and controlling a critically damaged aircraft. Each second of flight involved real-time monitoring of velocity, altitude, energy state, and remaining countermeasures. The Shilka engagement required both spatial awareness and precise control inputs. The pilot's inverted flight minimized radar acquisition, confused target tracking, and reduced exposure to gunfire. Damage assessment mid-flight informed immediate risk management, hydraulic failure, partial wing and tail damage, and engine performance degradation. Survival depended on mechanical knowledge, manual systems operation, and continuous input adjustments. The GBU-39 strike represented the culmination of the MiG's mission, neutralizing command and munitions targets with surgical precision. Despite networked air defenses, the combination of high-altitude release, precision-guided munitions, and the pilot's tactical planning ensured mission success. The bomb's sequential targeting, guided by inertial and infrared sensors, destroyed both operational command structures and ammunition caches with near-simultaneous detonations. The MiG's final approach required careful energy management. With only 30 kilograms of fuel remaining, systems degraded, and hydraulic control partially lost, the pilot executed manual landing procedures. Emergency systems compensated for failures, allowing controlled descent, safe touchdown, and emergency gear deployment. The landing required a precise sequence of main wheel contact, controlled bounce, and final nose gear lock. The aircraft came to a stop with all systems partially compromised. Smoke, leaking fluids, and structural damage were evident, yet the MiG survived to complete both the mission and the return flight. This sequence, from low-level penetration, missile evasion, engagement with active threats, precision bombing, and emergency landing, highlighted the complexity of integrated air operations in a contested environment. The pilot's situational awareness, reaction timing, and technical knowledge were crucial. Each countermeasure, from chaff and flare deployment to barrel rolls, vertical stalls, and high-G maneuvers, directly countered specific threats. The layered Russian air defense network required sequential adaptation, which the MiG pilot managed effectively, ensuring both survival and mission completion. If this frontline account of the MiG-29 mission kept your heart racing, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Stay on target for the next high-stakes operation.